Hello everybody, my name is Barnaby Lenon and I am chairman of the Independent Schools Council. And the Independent Schools Council, amongst other things, collects data on behalf of the schools that are in membership of the Independent Schools Council. That's about 1,300 schools, about 80% of independent school pupils in the United Kingdom. And I'm joined on this short call by Jonathan Parks, who runs the research at the ISC. And we're talking about the annual census, which we do every year at the beginning of the year. So let me start by asking Jonathan, was it difficult collecting data this year in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, indeed, Barnaby. The census we always carry out on the third Thursday in January without fail each year. So that meant that this year, census had to be carried out not only during a pandemic, but also during a lockdown during a pandemic. So schools at that time were required to close their premises, educate pupils remotely, unless they were the child of a key worker or considered vulnerable. So what we had to do was ask schools to record all pupils on roll, including all those who were being educated remotely, and that included pupils who were working remotely in other countries and could not enter the UK due to the COVID restrictions in place. We also required boarders who would normally be on site in a boarding house to be recorded according to their registration because they were also being educated remotely in the vast majority of circumstances.
Yeah, so even if they were being educated remotely, they still counted as our pupils, I suppose.
Yes, they were basically on roll, whether they were on roll on site, whether they were on roll at home, or whether they were on roll in another country and were unable to get into the country, into the UK.
Yeah. Well, back in late March 2020, when all schools were required to close, the general feeling was that independent schools, because they charged fees, were going to be in serious trouble. So now comes the most important question I'm going to ask, and that is, what in fact happened to our pupil numbers between the academic year 19 to 20 and the academic year 20 to 21? Did they slump as we expected them to?
Well, no, they have reduced, but certainly they have not slumped anywhere near the sort of possible predictions some people in the sector had at that time. So the total number of pupils in ISC schools on Census Day this year was 532,237. This is down from last year when the census was conducted before the COVID pandemic hit in 2020. And in 2020, we had 537,315 pupils in membership. So despite this reduction, that's still the third highest in ISC's history since we started having a census in 1974. And if we look at the like-for-like change, that's between the schools that did the census in both years. There's 1,337 schools who did the census in both years. The like-for-like percentage reduction is 1.3%.
Yeah, well, rejoice, rejoice. I mean, I must say that is far better than most people assumed we would be looking at in this year. And of course, we don't know exactly why the numbers have held up. What we do know is that independent schools got a very good press for excellent online teaching. And a lot of parents who, at the very beginning of this pandemic, were concerned about having to pay fees when their children weren't even in the school, started to say, thank goodness our children are getting very good online teaching. And I know that quite a number of head teachers have said to me that they have experienced an increase in demand for this coming September, which may reflect that. But surely that wasn't true, was it, of boarding schools? Because boarding schools had the double whammy of not being able to teach their pupils. They weren't allowed to under government regulations. And then pupils who were fleeing the country because of our very high rates of COVID. So what happened to boarding numbers?
So Barnaby boarding was understandably challenged by the pandemic more than day schools. The number of registered boarders in our member schools reduced by 8,905 to 65,345. However, it should be noted that the number of registered day pupils at boarding schools actually increased by nearly 5,000. And there is some evidence that parents during the pandemic and this academic year have re-registered their child as a day pupil at a boarding school, which may mean that next year, when we do the census in 2022, we may see a return of some of those pupils, perhaps all those pupils, to boarding status.
Okay, so some parents who lived in the United Kingdom moved their pupils, their children, from boarding to day. But what about the overseas pupils in places like Hong Kong and China? Surely they've gone, haven't they? I mean, what happened to them?
Yes, so when we look at some non-British pupils, overseas pupils, we record non-British pupils in the census in two different ways. We ask schools to record number of pupils whose parents live overseas and the number of non-British pupils whose parents live in the UK. So if you look at the first category, where pupils would have to come into the country from another country, understandably there has been a reduction. So we have 24,674 pupils whose parents are overseas, down from 29,446 in 2020. And pupil numbers in most countries or regions were down, not surprisingly, this year. However, there was an increase in ISC pupils whose parents live in Hong Kong. If we look at the second category, where the parents are based in the UK, there's actually been a small increase in the number of pupils. So this year, we have 29,562 compared to last year, 29,204. If we look at one specific group, which will be of interest, which is pupils from the European Economic Area, which of course is affected by the fact that we've now left the EU, and therefore they have to apply for visas just like any other pupil from another country outside Europe. There's been a decrease in those where the parents live overseas, but there's actually an increase where the parents are based in the UK. And just another element of overseas education is our schools. Some of our schools operate campuses in other countries, with China being the most popular country to base a campus. And we now have 81 of those overseas campuses overall around the world, which is an increase of 12 from last year.
Yeah, that's incredible, isn't it? I mean, I suppose those overseas franchise schools were being planned long before the pandemic, and they've just set them up and continued as expected. But those franchise schools abroad are important because the money that the schools in the United Kingdom receive from those usually is going to fund bursaries. It's going to fund bursaries. So tell us a bit about fees, because I'm a governor of a number of schools, and the main thing that the governors had to talk about was what are the implications of this pandemic for our setting of fees?
So this year there's actually been a record low increase in fees since last year. In fact, the lowest recorded annual rise in any ISC census since we started in 1974. So on average, fees have increased by only 1.1%, and day school fees have increased by only 0.9%. Clearly, schools have been very sensitive to the situation and parents' economic situations because of the pandemic, and actually 7 out of 10 of our member schools froze either all their fees this year or fees for some year groups.
Yeah, so fees have been held right down, notwithstanding the additional costs of running a school during the pandemic, because the teachers all still had to carry on teaching. And there were quite a lot of additional costs relating to COVID secure measures, cleaning and so on. And of course, in the background, the teachers' pension scheme, a huge additional cost which our schools are having to bear. So it's remarkable that they were able to hold fees down in the way that they did. But did that have a bad impact on fee assistance? I mean, I've mentioned bursaries once or twice. Maybe they had to be cut.
Actually, no. We were surprised to discover that actually fee assistance has gone up this year compared to last year. So yeah, the overall amount provided to help parents pay fees now stands at £1.1 billion. And just over 1 in 3 pupils in our schools receive some sort of fee assistance. Notably, means tested fee assistance has increased, and now stands at £455 million, and nearly half of pupils who are receiving a means tested bursary have a fee reduction of at least 50%. Interestingly, the only type of fee assistance that has reduced slightly in value since last year are non-means tested scholarships. So last year, £199 million was provided in that sort of fee assistance. This year, that's gone down to £194 million.
Well, Lord Agnew will be very pleased to hear that, because he was always saying we should reduce the amount of non-means tested scholarships. So that's it. I think it's thanks to you, Jonathan, and your team for all the hard work collecting the data this year. Thanks to the schools who filled in the forms at a most difficult time for them, actually, when schools were locked down and everyone was really feeling the pressure. But, you know, in summary, it's tremendous that the numbers have remained as good as they are, albeit difficulties for boarding schools. The fees have been held down as low as they ever have been, really, and bursary sums have gone up. So that's an encouraging set of results, and we'll look forward to seeing what the next census produces in January 2022. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.